Hi, it's Paris from Epic Reviews Austin, and it's time to go vote again. This time it's an AISD school bond proposition. The total amount is $892 million, which may strike you as an awful lot of money, and I think that's what they thought people were going to think. So they've actually divided it into 4 propositions. So you can vote for some, none, or all of it, and I'll briefly cover what the 4 propositions include and the total amount of each one. Proposition 1 is $140.5 million, and the spending is for technology, health, and energy conservation. Proposition 2 is $233.9 million, and it's money to be spent on new schools to deal with overcrowding, also on safety and security, and facility improvements for fine arts, PE, and athletics. Proposition 3 is $349.1 million, and it's money to be spent on repairing aging schools, infrastructure renovations, and also school library renovations. Proposition 4 is $168.5 million, and it's money to be spent on academic initiatives, also infrastructure facility improvements for fine arts, PE, and the old Anderson High School. Now, as for what that's going to cost you, the average homeowner who has a home worth about $200,000 will end up paying about $70 a year more in property taxes. Now, the election is on Saturday, May 11th, but early voting will start the end of this month. So from Monday, April 29th, you can go to one of the early voting centers and vote. And that concludes the factual reporting on this bond proposal. What follows is some editorializing, so if you're not interested in hearing that, you may as well click off now. Okay, so for people who wanted to hear this, people seem fond of complaining about regular bonds being put on the ballot, and it seems like every few years the school district does that. But of course, if they were funded in full by money from the state or some more permanent way, they wouldn't have to go begging every few years for more money. They obviously don't have money to cover everything, and it's sort of expected that they will, as most school districts do, come to the voters with these bond proposals. And as for the large amount of the bond and the fact that they broke it into the 4 pieces because they thought people might say, oh, no way we're going to vote for our $892 million bond, they figure at least they can get some parts of it passed, they're hoping. Well, keep in mind that it was just a couple years back the legislature, the state legislature, cut $5 billion from Texas school funding. And they're now considering whether they're going to restore maybe $2.5 billion, maybe $1 billion. But at the same time they cut the funding by $5 billion, they came out with these new STAR tests to replace the old tax test. And these are mandatory for kids to move up to the next grade. They're mandatory for schools to not be closed, for having not enough academic performance and so forth. So at the same time they cut the $5 billion in funding, they came out with the, I think it's a total of 15 tests that the kids have to pass to get through school. So in the past year, they've seen the results, so they saw they weren't doing very well. And they basically, the kids aren't passing the test with grades that are high enough that they wouldn't have some kind of penalty, both for the kids and maybe even for the schools. So the solution, apparently, rather than, well, let's restore that $5 billion, obviously we need to give more money to the schools if we're going to give them the requirement that they have to get most of their kids to do well on this test. That's not the answer they chose. Instead, now they're thinking of cutting the 15 tests down to 5 tests. Now, I'm not a fan of the standardized testing, but it seems to me if you do put it in place and say, here's the minimum things we want all the kids in Texas to learn, what they should really know when they graduate from high school, and then you cut money to the schools, and then you see the kids aren't passing the test, you should probably put the money back in rather than just say, well, all right, well, let's take this test out, this test out, this test out. That way they can at least pass the few tests that we leave behind. But of course, these days it's sacrilege to suggest spending any more money. And so people say, well, look, we cut $5 billion from the education budget. The schools are still open. The kids are still graduating. You know, obviously they can make do without the money. Well, the results of that, you're not going to see right now. Obviously, they're not going to close half the schools in Texas because of that. They'll keep the schools open. But it's a more subtle thing. It's something that you're going to see the results of in 10 or 15 years when the kids get out of school and what kind of jobs they're able to have with the education that they have. So for people concerned with taking money from future generations, you might want to consider how future generations will feel if you've taken away their chance for a proper education.